Welcome, y'all, to our International Larpers of Color panel. We swear that there are more than 4 of us, and there are probably at least 7. Forgive me, I'm just going to put it down. It's strange to hold it. So we're going to talk about how we're going to structure this panel first. And then we're going to go through, and we hope that you have a really great time and that you enjoy yourselves and we learn together today like this. Fun sauce. We are going to talk about ourselves, some of our personal experiences. Then we're going to talk about difficult and interesting topics for designers. We're going to talk about for players, and then we're going to talk specifically about things for players of color. We are also going to reserve many, many minutes for questions. We have a rule about questions, though. We encourage you to ask literally whatever you want. We reserve the right to say, no thank you, to that question. But we do want to encourage you to ask, because we're not a monolith. A question I am not mentally able to answer today could be answered by someone else, and they are okay to take on that duty or what have you. So please understand that in this space, we want everyone to really feel comfortable about being curious. Being curious is really important to fundamental growth between people. Okay, let's talk about folks. Introductions. We're going to start right and go all the way down. Use yield mic.
I'm amazed by this microphone. It's a double-handed. I'm getting some extra wielding here, and I'm hoping I'm going to take double damage if I catch someone with it. Okay. So I'm Mo Holkar. I'm a Larper from the UK. I started off back in the 80s doing fantasy LARP, fighting orcs in the forest, which was pretty much what we had then. And in recent years, I've become a Nordic LARper. My experience as a person of colour obviously started much younger than that. And so one of the things we're going to talk about is the interaction between our lives as people of colour outside LARPing and our experiences within LARPing, and similarities and differences between those.
I'm Clio Davis. I am a LARPer from the US. I split my time between Arlington, Virginia and Austin, Texas. I'm relatively new to the LARP scene. It's been less than 2 years with official LARP, a lot of LARP adjacent activities, whatever that means. And prior to that, I definitely came from a background of immersive theater, which I know like people have very divided feelings on here. I have experience writing some freeform games and other game design stuff. I'm a game designer for a living.
Is the mic supposed to work for us?
No.
There's no PA.
It's just
only for the recording.
Yes, I will speak a bit louder so that you can hear. I'm Aina Skjønsfjell Lakou. I'm Norwegian, and I've been LARPing since I was about 15, and I took a break for about 5 years, and then 3, 4, 5 years ago I came back into the LARP scene with a boom and a bang, and been designing games and playing games and thinking games and dreaming games pretty much my entire life, even when not LARPing or before I even knew LARPing was a thing.
My name is Jonaya Kemper. I am from the U.S., specifically the East Coast, which is rather important, actually, especially when it concerns my identity. I have been LARPing for a second. No, really. Last year was my first Knutpunkt, and I came here because I desperately wanted academic knowledge on LARPing to finish my thesis, and I got a lot from this community, and I hope to give a little back.
So my name is Ross Cheung. Oh, this really doesn't work. At least not for all of you out here in real space. Hi, internet. I was born in New York City. My parents were Chinese American, Cantonese, Hong Kong, but I was born in New York City and grew up in New Jersey. I then moved to California for college, where I joined our local college, where I joined our college gaming club, and we all thought that we invented LARP and we were so smart. We then went out into the wider world and found out this wasn't exactly true. So since then I've been LARPing. I live in Los Angeles, California right now, but obviously love traveling to LARP and talk LARP, play LARP, write LARP even. So.
All right, it's my turn. Hello, everyone. I'm Kat Jones, and I'm also from the United States. I grew up in Iowa, which is in the middle of the country, and that also, it will turn out, has very important things to do with my identity. For those of you that aren't familiar with Iowa, it's about 90% white. So I'll talk a little bit about that later, I'm sure. I moved to Western Massachusetts, which is on the East Coast, for graduate school, and while I was there, I got very involved in the indie tabletop community, and that's really where most of my gaming experience comes from. That's where I sort of started my game design work, and then a friend of mine, Julia Ellingbo, was a guest of honor at Festival, and that was my introduction to the Nordic LARP scene, as it were. And after that, I've gotten much more involved in playing LARPs and writing LARPs and talking and writing about LARPs.
Okay, we're going to answer a question that you may be thinking already. And that question is, hey friends, what's your ethnicity? I will begin. I am a Black American. I am black, y'all, blackity black, y'all. For those 8 people that get that joke. But in America, you may notice some things. In America, that comes with various different threads of history. If you were to like genetically test me, quote unquote, those don't work. And don't matter. I am also of Eastern European descent and also of unnamed white descent no one will ever figure out for reasons of the slaveries. Yes, I like to make these jokes. You can laugh if you think they're funny. I'm not going to dislike you. So, Ross, tell me.
So, I mean, it's much more simpler. Both of my parents were from Hong Kong, Guangzhou, China. Although, even though I was born in New York City, I can get more specific than that, Chuchao, Guangzhou, but I don't think that really matters.
But you're not just like Asian.
Yes, but
it turns out that's not a thing.
So actually, Asia's kind of big, and there are lots of different types of Asian.
There's more than one type of Asian?
There, in fact, are many types of Asian.
Oh my God.
Oh my God, yes.
Who knew? Oh. I mean, let's see. G-Cat, tell us about yourself.
Well, my story begins in Cardenas, Cuba. Fidel Castro took over Cuba, some of you might know, and my mother was sent when she was 13 years old to the middle of nowhere, Iowa, to stay with an American family until the revolution was over and things had settled down. She's still in the U.S. In Iowa is where she met my father, who is Scottish, Welsh, British, Irish. And I was lucky enough in 90% white Iowa to grow up in a town that had for Iowa, fairly substantial Mexican-American population. So I identify much more as a Latina, which I know throws off our whole, like, Latinas are not a monolith, blah, blah. But for me, I didn't really grow up in a Cuban-American community. So I don't really identify. I know I'm Cuban-American, but my community is much more of a mixture of different Latinx backgrounds.
I'm sorry, Kat, are you telling me that ethnicity is complicated?
Yes. as is race.
Oh my.
No.
Aina, tell me all about you. I hear you are not from the U.S.
No. Hello, representing the Nordic countries, Larpers of Color. I might be 1/4 or 1/5 of the community.
All right here.
Hi. I am, my mother's Norwegian, born in Norway, and we've traced our family tree back to the Vikings, so yeah. And also part Sami, so yeah, indigenous people right here. And some Russian, I do believe there's some Romani in me. This is all from my mother's side. And yeah, we think there might have been one Chinese guy. So proper mix there. And also, my father is from Africa. Yeah. So when I tell people, when they ask me the question, but where are you from, really? I usually say, well, I do have some Chinese in me. And people go like, yeah, but. So yeah, no, my dad is from the Ivory Coast, specifically quite in the middle. He's from the Bete people. So that's this.
Cleo?
Yeah. So I'm a different flavor of Asian from Ross. I'm specifically biracial or it's, multi something or other. Yeah. So my mother is Korean. I'm Korean American. My dad is like from a medley of European. He was born in America, but like we have like Irish, Welsh, Scottish, English, some mysterious Scandinavian thing that we don't like know exactly what's going on.
Always at least one mysterious Scandinavian.
Don't know how that happened.
It's somewhere in there.
I mean, it's just very true. Y'all went far. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's true. My mom's side of the family came to the U.S. in the 60s, and like my grandparents are fucking badass. They like escaped North Korean soldiers trying to like recruit them. They like survived starvation and U.S. soldiers being around and all sorts of stuff. And if you're wondering if my grandmother is like, we came to this country and like, why are you a game designer? No, she loves that I'm a game designer. She's very thrilled about that. So. Yeah, so I am sometimes, it depends on where I am, if I'm passing as a white or not. Not passing enough that white supremacists haven't actually come up to me because I'm Asian, but white passing enough that sometimes people question whether I have the right to speak on, like, the experiences of being Asian.
We're going to talk about that. We're going to put a pin there, and we're going to move on down to Mo.
Hey, so I am yet another different kind of Asian. And it turns out in the UK we don't really have Asians. We have people like me who are of Indian descent, who are also for complicated reasons known as Pakis, and then we have Chinese people, which is everyone else, all the other. But so my father came over from India, and my family there go back many generations. My mother is British; she's half English, half Scottish, fair-haired, blue-eyed, and so on. And I, of course, combine the best of both ethnotypes in my personal appearance. But much like Cleo, this is not enough to stop me getting beaten up by racists when I was a kid and questioned about am I really ethnic by people who have darker skin than me. So it is a complicated business being a person of colour, even in the UK, which is, we're going to talk about this, race relations in the UK obviously very different from what they are in the US and in continental Europe. And probably every country that you LARP in, you'll find things are slightly different from what you're experiencing back home.
Okay, so now that we've kind of given you some background, we're going to talk about why this is important in LARP, okay? And we're going to explain why we care about diverse games and some of our experiences in games that you think are diverse, but guess what, they're not. We are going to speak on a lot of issues, and so our first one is, we are not a monolith. This phrase typically means that we each carry our own individual experiences, and even within groups that are very similar, we have very different ideas. Kat, I know that you wanted to really talk about this as well. I'm going to pass that on to you.
Okay.
Yeah. And then whoever else wants to, I'll keep stack.
Yeah, so I think it's very easy when you're thinking about diversity to collapse diversity into this sort of flat term that means, I'm not really sure what it means. I'm going to be honest here. The term diversity to me has become this like empty signifier that's like, we want to do the right thing, but we don't really want to put too much work into doing the right thing. So we're going to diversify and maybe get a token person of color. But as will become very clear as we continue this conversation, all of us up here have very different ideas about what it means to have a diverse game and what kind of stories we're interested in telling and what kind of stories we're interested in playing. And my experience as a person of color in the United States is very, very different from any of the other people up on this stage who are also from the United States because of our backgrounds, because of where we grew up in the United States, because of how we choose to identify, because of our personal experiences. So asking one person of color what they think about something and then generalizing that to people of color say this is super, super problematic. And even if you ask two people of color and say, people of color say this, it's still super, super problematic because you could ask 10 people of color and you might get 10 different answers about what people of color think about a particular topic.
So, us being approximately 4 people of color in Scandinavia, we have this concept and idea that all the American people of color, they have these radical notions or unradical notions that are so different from what we think up here in tiny Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and kind of Finland, and and we all are like, yeah, but they're so aggressive, and we don't think that. And then we have this conversation. So what do we think? And it suddenly dawns on us. I think something, and Larper of Color number 2 thinks something radically different, and Larper of Color number 3 is actually really disagreeing with the both of us because they have a completely different notion again. And then we suddenly realize, could that be the same in America?
It turns out that is true.
Apparently, yes. I've spoken with people who agree with me and who disagree with me and who agree with person number 2 and disagree with person number 3. It's like, it dawned on us. We can't really say that in America people think that, blah, blah, blah. And, oh my God, those Americans, because they really are different people.
It turns out that sometimes I agree with Scandinavians more than I agree with Americans, and that makes people uncomfortable.
So I like to talk about the secret, non-existent handbook that all POC have that people seem to think that we have. So, because sometimes, like, someone will have a question, like, okay, I designed this game. I think there might be a little bit of a problem in it. Can you please help me fix it? And they think that by going up to one person of color, we're going to have the exact same answer because we have the handbook with all the answers in our pocket. We just don't show it to anybody.
Page 93. Oh.
And, like, and sometimes it's difficult to explain that to people that, like, no, we're not a hive mind of, like, people of color.
I actually can't answer questions on deep Japanese history, folks.
Yeah, and having one person, like, especially if you have any kind of LARP that is like trying to directly tackle or even indirectly tackle some of these issues, you can't have like, oh, well, I talked to one person of color who's also from a completely different background than the background we're trying to tackle, but they said it was okay, so it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and it turns out that once one outs oneself as a Larper of Color, this is a service that one is often called upon to provide. And you know, it is very welcome that LARP designers are reaching out to try and be inclusive and, you know, to really care about fixing potential problems in their LARPs. But, you know, there are no easy answers, and your mate who is a person of color is maybe going to provide you with some helpful stuff, but I mean, the sad truth is there is no shortcut. There is no way that you can get all those boxes ticked and say, yes, I've done my job, and this LARP now thoroughly works.
And several things. Like, first of all, so there's a Facebook group called Larpers of Color, and occasionally people come and ask questions, and probably the most asked one is cultural appropriation. And my sense is that most people who come and ask it come away more confused because they get wildly different answers. Yeah. Yes, it's really complicated. And because people come from diverse backgrounds, and to drive the point home, there are two more anecdotes. First, like in the United States, when you mean people of color, well, like people have really, really different backgrounds. So like some people came because their ancestors were brought over as slaves against their will. My ancestors weren't, but even among people who came from the same region of China, like, for example, my dad came over for his PhD for grad school and stayed here. The rest was business. On my mother's side, my grandfather came over from the same exact region to work on a railroad. At a time when Asian men weren't allowed to stay, there was a thing called an Exclusion Act. Only men were... The Chinese Exclusion Act, specifically.
They made that real specific.
Yeah, it was very, very obvious who was targeting. He wasn't allowed to stay, so he went back. He actually went back to China to have a wife and kids. And then in 1949, things happened, and China got very dangerous. So there was a lot of like smuggling across the border, and he had to lie and basically say, "I'm going to Hong Kong on a trip, and I'm taking my family," and he never came back. So even among two people from the same region, there could be a very, very different story.
That's very international as well, because it turns out that Aina and Lisselle are not the same person, nor do they come from the same country. I am also neither of those people. Remember this later when you may not remember.
Thank you. Aina, tall. Jonaya, short.
I am only this tall to ride that ride.
Yeah, and also people when they come and talk, because they try, LARP designers.
Yeah,
they try it. They come and they were like, so we want to create a LARP that includes diversity. So what do you think? And I go, about what? And yeah, do you think it's inclusive enough? I'm like, am I invited to this LARP? If I am, then I would say it's inclusive. Can I bring a friend?
So let's actually talk about that. Let's talk about what diversity and how designers talk about what that means, like what stories people are telling. You want to go first? Not, I'll start us off. All right. So one of the things that kind of kills me is when someone messes up their LARP and then sends me a private message on Facebook and is like, Jonaya, fix it. That's really weird because you have my Facebook Messenger. That means that you could have asked me before you started writing this LARP. Let that sink in. Diversity is not an afterthought. People are human. I would like to play in your game because many of you are very brilliant and you write really great games that I would love to go to. And by the way, the number one thing I have ever been asked by non-LARPers of color who would like to become LARPers of color are, where can I LARP? Whose games can I do? Where can I go? And it really, really makes me sad when I'm like, because we do have to think about a certain set of things. If I am sending someone to a game where I know that let's take a boffer game, for instance. Your categories are super racist. If you have a group of people who are shifty liars, and then you call them roam people who roam across the plains and also do dances for money, I know exactly what group of people you're talking about who are highly marginalized all across the globe. If you call these people wear sombreros and cut gardens, as a side note, there are LARPs that literally have that description. If that is a race to play in your game, I don't know if I can't send a Mexican person to you. That is not okay. That is not safe. But we need to think about these things before we design them. And it's almost as if we could use our Larpers of Color friends to collaborate on games. Whoa. Could you believe that?
But I would also like to point out that just because you ask me, is it okay if I put in this sombrero-wearing race of gardeners into my game? And I say, actually, I don't have a problem with that. And because maybe I don't know any better, because let's face it, the Larper of Color handbook doesn't really exist. So I don't have a problem with this, but that doesn't mean that 5 million, 1,000, I don't know how many Mexicans there are, but I'm sure there are so many more than there are Norwegians. And I think they might, as a collective, yes, be very offended. But people will come and ask me, do you know, can we talk about Kenya? And I'm like, sure, talk about Kenya. I wouldn't know. I'm not from Kenya. I've never been to Kenya. I think I know one Kenyan person. And so it's just because this automatically signals she's a Kenyan encyclopedia.
Africa is not a state?
Can we just make that completely clear, everyone? Africa is not a country. Africa is not a country. Africa is not a country.
Are you telling me that Africa is not a country?
Africa is not a country. And even the countries in Africa are so synthetically cut up. They would literally just... Europe was like, yeah, I'll take this part, and you can have this part. Wait, let's make it a square so it's even, because we don't want that you get more than I get. And then it was in the middle of a village, people were like, and so now my neighbor is French, and I'm English. Cool, but we speak the same language. No, we don't. We're not allowed anymore. We are supposed to speak French and English.
It's almost as if colonialism is poison.
Africa is not a country.
So one of the other things that I think many of us have noticed and talked about is that there tends to be another option when designers are going for diversity, and that is if we put race in our game, we're going to have racism. And then the people of color will not come to our game because people of color don't want to have to deal with racism in the game. So we'll just get rid of race and racism, problem solved.
That fixes everything.
No, it doesn't. Because what that does is it erases the experiences that most of us have had to live with and experience. And if we are going to play people who share our identities in your historical game or in your contemporary game, it feels really uninclusive to tell us that we are welcome to come, but that part of our experience doesn't get to be part of the game. And I think a really important thing when you are designing is to think about how can you give your Larpers of Color the agency to decide how they are going to play on race and racism in your game. Don't decide for them. All right? We're not a monolith. So I might be like, yes, I want to play on racial oppression and I want people to say snipey things about my skin color and how I'm not really a person of color because I'm so white. Someone else might be like, yo, that's too real. I don't want that in my LARP. I don't want to play on racial oppression because that's my everyday life, and no. But you don't know that as you're designing your game, right?
It's really tricky. Yeah, but you're right.
Oh, then I will.
Clio will take it.
Yeah, and I have to say that I didn't realize how important being able to play someone of my own ethnicity was going to be to me until I did it for the first time. So is it all right if we move into this territory?
Because we have loads of things. Go ahead.
We got loads of things. And I think the first time was in Just a Little Lovin', the USA run that we had in August, I want to say?
Yes.
Yes. And I played Penn for anybody who is knowledgeable. And I was interested in playing someone because it came up like, this is a possibility. You can play someone of your own ethnicity. And so I got to play a Korean American woman in the 80s who was like really, really hardcore and like worked really hard and like gave no fucks about anything. And I realized at one point I'm playing my mother. And I'd never been given the chance to play my mother before because I was never explicitly being like playing my own race or ethnicity. And I think I was never also explicitly not playing my ethnicity, but it was kind of assumed like, here's a pretty like kind of Europeanish name. Everybody in your family is white except for you. So like maybe I'm adopted. And it's not like in that situation, I don't want to like turn to my fellow players who are not Asian of some sort and be like, hey, do you want to play my ethnicity? But it's also weird to be like, hey, you're the one who's like the least of you here, so you default to playing the majority ethnicity. All right, I'm going to pass this on to Mo. Yes, there you go.
Yeah, so this was, what Cleo's just said really resonates with me. I didn't realise until a few years ago that effectively I'd been LARPing as white the whole time because, I'm fair enough skinned that I pass as white, or people can assume that the character I'm playing is a white character unless it's explicitly stated otherwise. And it was actually quite empowering to start explicitly stating otherwise, to say, well, no, this character I'm playing is actually half Indian or Indian. I can represent Indians as well. Why not? And that was something that, it may be hard to imagine, but growing up in a majority white culture with majority white friends, if you can pass as white, then the default more or less is to do so, and that becomes something that you just do very naturally without thinking about it. And to actually be able to, in a contemporary setting LARP, to say, well, no, I'm going to play a character whose experiences of his ethnicity are similar to my own, was tremendously liberating and powerful, but also, tremendously painful, and it generated all sorts of thoughts in me. And I know, although we're here talking about being a person of colour, of course there are many LARPers who are marginalised in other ways and who are not necessarily represented or able to play their identity in mainstream LARP. And I think perhaps some of you have gone through a similar process of finding, oh yeah, so this is a LARP where it can actually be about people like me and I can be myself. And I think it's a wonderful thing that LARP can do that for us, and we need to recognise it and take advantage of it and make the most of it and enrich ourselves through that process.
You did a lot of work really quickly. Back to Mo really quickly.
We can skip the next half hour or so.
Because you did On Location, and you were talking about how you wanted people to feel welcome in that space. Do you think you can talk a little bit about On Location and the characters that you wrote?
Yeah, sure. So On Location, it's a Nordic-influenced LARP that ran in the UK in December, and people design their own characters around a kind of skeletal archetype that we give them. And we wanted to make it inclusive in that way that we've just been talking about. But, simply extending the invitation and say you can come here and play whatever kind of character you like is one step of that, but the default is still very strong within people. And even when they've got explicit permission to create characters over a wide range, they're still going to be channeled and they're going to be influenced by their mental picture of what the LARP is going to be like. So one thing that we tried to do to influence that was in all the marketing and the website and all the publicity that we used around the LARP, we had a load of photos of film stars and movie industry people from the era. And we made very sure that there was a great representation as we could manage of people of colour and people who looked unusual in other ways. We wanted to have it be that someone who was not a mainstream ethnicity or mainstream lifestyle LARPer coming to the site could have a look and say, oh, maybe I could be that person. Maybe I don't have to be Gary Cooper and Greta Garbo. Maybe I could be, Anna May Wong. Maybe I could be Cab Calloway. Maybe I could be Josephine Baker. And it worked to a certain extent, so we did have a slightly higher Larper of Color representation within the LARP than is the average, but there's more work that can be done. And so, we're running it again in the summer, and we've rewritten the the policy on prejudice. This is picking up something that Kat said. We had originally said, prejudice is going to be something that you don't have to experience in our LARP if you're playing a minority person. The default is not going to be prejudice. But we realized that some people did want to play on that and others didn't. So we've got now a kind of a complex system of opting in and opting out, and we've got a load of safety and consent rules around that. The hope is that in the next run you'll be able to experience as much prejudice as you want to and no more. And there's going to be negotiation around that. And describing it like that, it sounds horribly clunky and difficult to manage, and maybe it will be. But our hope is that our hope is because players want to help other players enjoy the kind of LARP that they want, and sometimes there needs to be a workshop around that. And if people have to play through it and it feels a bit awkward when you're doing it in the LARP, it won't feel so awkward.
So, Kat wrote rewrote some of the characters for the American run of Jal this summer. And I'd like her to talk a little bit about that because Jal was rewritten in a very specific way. But before I give this to you, I'm going to say this publicly. I got to play a LARP character that could have only existed if someone didn't go out on a limb and make it. I got to play a Black intersectional feminist at the dawn of intersexual feminism. In 1982, Audre Lorde and the company River Collective was coming up with amazing thoughts about how we could all include all types of women. We were talking about what it means to be a lesbian, what it means to be gay, what it means to be bisexual, and all of those intersections of marginalities. That character did not exist in any LARP that I knew of, and I definitely did not have any opportunity to play something that was so close to me. And it ended up being a wonderful experience, and I sought out the racism. And the people who were there gave it to me, and it was so great. It was the best because I also got to bring nuance to the game that people may not understand if you do not have the American context, which was, at this time, wealthy, white, upper-class people of the gay experience began to separate themselves from people of color who are traditionally poorer. This means that when the AIDS epidemic hit, the Latino and Black communities went like this straight down. And there was like super complicated methods, but a cohesive community fractured along the same lines of race and class. And being the person to say that and make people realize that that is what happened and what was going to happen was a really great experience for me, and my co-players ended up thanking me for it. Oppression can be fun, folks. But only in LARP.
So I just want to say that it really means a lot to me that was such a powerful experience for you, and also like Clio, that it was really, really important for me. I played in the JAL 2015 run, and I played Santiago, who, for those of you not familiar with JAL, Santiago is a Puerto Rican lesbian, take no shit. She's an amazing character. And let's talk about intersectionality, yes? I am a Latina, but I'm also a queer Latina. And the opportunities that I have to play those intersections of my identity, yeah, you can imagine, I'm sure. And then I was handed this character. And it was a life-changing experience for me. Like, that is not hyperbole. Like, getting a chance to play someone with those intersecting identities in a game about queer people was a magical experience. And so when I took on the organizing team for JAL USA, I wanted other people to be able to have that experience, right? And I wanted other people who were people of color and also queer to be able to tell stories about queer people who were also people of color. And so I talked to a bunch of people of color game designer friends that I had, you know, other queer folks of color. What would it be like to play in a LARP like this? What would you want to see? What would you wouldn't want to see? I got lots and lots of different answers, of course, because we're not a monolith. And then I had to sit down and sort of think about how I was going to do it. And what I really wanted was to give as much agency to the players as I could while also staying true to the original vision of the game, right? And so I let people sort of decide, did they want a character that reflected their own ethnicity, but also then how did they want to play on that, right? Because this idea that because you're a person of color, that becomes central to your identity is also not always the case, right? That being queer might be much more important, or the fact that you were adopted, or the fact that you come from LA and now you're in New York. I cannot decide what is going to be central to somebody's identity. So I wanted to leave it open. If you want to play on this stuff, you can. If this is a really important part of who your character is, play on that. If that's just one aspect among many, that's also okay too.
Well, yeah. So first of all, this is cool. I actually played Eli, who was in the original gel, I think just Jewish, but my character was changed to Asian Jewish. And I'm sure some of you were thinking, like, can this happen?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. And yeah, the answer is absolutely yes. I actually have relatives who are Asian Jewish themselves. But I actually wanted to talk about this because there's a question that some designers might be having, which is, like, I'll admit, like, the question might be there being like, oh, like some designers going like, oh, I'm doing historical LARP now. Do I have to stretch the plausibility to like fit people of color in? Which is itself interesting because you're now adopting the idea that people of color didn't exist in history, which is kind of.
We just arrived here.
Yeah, we just appeared
We just
suddenly,
got
21st century.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of. So first of all, that's not actually true and stuff like that. But talking about LARP design. This is actually kind of a thing because I have a background in chamber LARP, but as the world moves towards making more 360-degree LARPs, designers themselves might find themselves thinking upon this pattern. And also, I guarantee that some of your players who are people of color are now looking at 360 LARPs and going, do I belong? Will I be welcome here? Will people get snippy because I'm ruining their immersion? Like, I've actually gotten flack for going to a medieval fantasy LARP because Asians don't exist in medieval fantasy.
Oh my.
So,
How
quote
did
unquote.
They get paper?
They invented it, obviously.
Or gunpowder.
So,
Or noodles. Or like silk and most things. Sorry, I'm just. Woo.
that's fair. And this, I got this flack before Hamilton came around, and the idea that you could like actually have people of color inside a historical narrative. So.
Oh, no, give me this one.
So.
Oh, we're gonna. Oh, Aina, I look forward to your words now too
Yeah.
as well.
So, I realize now while you guys were talking that I have never played a character that isn't white unless I have made her myself. Which is funny, and it's not like it was written on my character sheet. You're playing this person, she is white. But I'm put in a family where everyone else, my mother, my father, my brother, my sister, everyone is white. Now, of course, Scandinavia, again, for Larpers of Color. Yeah, there was this one LARP where my husband was the other Larper of Color there, which was just by coincidence. But in general, my character was written as white, and you can tell because she has a completely Scandinavian-sounding name. Now, I usually just use my Scandinavian name, but it's not my only name. I have African names, and I realize that, yes, it's hard to, when you are a Nordic LARP designer from the Nordic countries, to put in exotic-sounding names when you write your characters, because you don't want to seem appropriative.
Yeah, we have interesting lines here.
Yeah, you don't want to be like, oh yes, you are playing obviously the Chinese character, and you are the one from Africa. So yeah, I get it, but perhaps when you design a LARP, make sure that there is space for the person. Why create only LARP characters that are white. And I didn't even realize how white my LARP life has been up until fairly recently. And now, while I was thinking about it, shit, not a single one of my characters that I didn't specifically adjust and write into their background history, that there is some non-white in her. It wasn't even considered. And I was like, please consider me. My color exists, even though it's not an issue, but it's still a thing.
What was interesting was on Just a Little Loving, there was a little checkbox that said, would you like to play on would you like to play on race? And it was like, check or no check. Oh, that is so useful, because then you could just email the player and be like, oh, and how would you like to do this?
But also, this is a very important thing. Play on race does not necessarily mean that I want the world to see, oh, there's that mulatto girl over there.
She's there in the back.
No, it's just...
Ooh, can we go there? Can we go to the LARP I'm about to talk about right now?
Oh, yes. Go to the
Okay,
LARP.
so Aina and I went to Fortune and Felicity, and we were wonderful, badass wilfs, widow, fill in the blank. Before I got to Fortune and Felicity, there was nothing in my brain that said I was not going to be a black woman. I mean, because I am a black woman, and they existed in the Regency era. And by the way, Jane Austen did in fact write a black woman into one of her novels. And she was hot, and that's what Jane Austen said. So there you go. So when I arrived, by the way, there were a fair amount of people of color in Fortune and Felicity. But something got back to me that was a little distressing. As you can tell, Aina and I, in full Regency dress, maybe raised a couple eyebrows, but not too many. People tried to ignore that. But someone also ended up using the N-word.
The actual
The full one that we're not going to say. Now, we didn't know about this because someone had sense. And by sense, I mean they knew what they were doing. They have been talked to and that they're fine. It's not an issue. But it is an issue because that's actually not historically accurate, is it?
It's not historically accurate at all.
When you talk about your slaves in England, and it turns out, 1830, were there slaves in England?
In fact, that was not allowed. Slavery was
Was
abolished.
it illegal?
Quite so.
Oh, so did you pull that out of nowhere because of something you may have seen repeated?
You pulled it out of your racist ass.
You didn't. You may not have meant it that way, but you did it anyway. And that happens. I am actually disappointed that didn't happen near me because there could have been duels, and I could have been very upset about it.
There will be fans in places you don't want fans to.
You don't know what we could have done with fans. But then something else curious happened, which was photography. Sometimes people of color at LARPs get taken, their photos get taken less. Now, this is not because you are a horrible human being. No one is a horrible human being all of the time. But sometimes you may be thinking about what is that BBC aesthetic and also forgetting that there were a metric fuck ton of people of color. So there is one picture of Aina and I together as sister. We were not related, by the way.
Yeah.
No.
Not related.
We were related in the end, but
In-laws.
we were in-laws. We were very upset that we did not end up getting a full family portrait because for once we would have been in the majority than the lone white person in the middle. But it's fine.
Yeah,
so she did an MS Paint.
I did an MS Paint of us.
true.
It's cool. It's online, but it was kind of hurtful to see that we did actually go and get lots of photos taken,
Yeah.
and for some reason they just didn't appear, and we were like, it's not even that we're not conventionally pretty that some people were complaining about, because I've seen myself.
You should have seen this neckline. This neckline was everything.
Yeah. So it's not that, but you just kind of feel like, oh yes, that's my elbow in the background, and I think that could be my feather top someplace. And we felt kind of erased. And I don't know if it was intentional, but it kind of feels that way. And when you have to actually nag the photographer, and I know you took pictures of me because I stood in front of your camera doing this. And then it was like, yeah, no, there aren't. I'm like, I stood there in front of your camera for 15 minutes, so how can there be no pictures of me?
Oh, here it is. Yeah, literally, and then, oh, here it is.
Yeah.
But the thing is that what we should say is that we're not saying that your photographers are terrible. This is internalized oppression. This is what you think is aesthetically pleasing that is based on years and years and years and years of historical oppression that erases people who you think do not fit what your LARP should look like. And by accident, I mean like you're doing this unintentionally, you don't even realize that you've hurt some folks.
You're not a horrible person.
You're not a horrible person. And maybe your camera screwed up, but like, these faces though.
Yeah, so
Let me see them at least so I can say, that was terrible. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say it is very easy when we talk about historical games and historical accuracy to fall back in our historical accuracy on what we see in Hollywood.
Yes.
And I can tell you as an American, Hollywood is not historically accurate, right? It's all bullshit, folks. It's all bullshit, right? And watching a historical movie that was made in Hollywood is much more indicative of the time in which the movie was made than the time in which the movie was made about. And so when we fall back on these BBC visuals, when we think about Greta Garbo and Gary Cooper, right, you have to do a little extra digging, right? You have to... Exactly. The entire genre of the Western, so many of these iconic genres that we think of, we can make them better. We can make them more inclusive, and sometimes that's also making them much more historically accurate.
Yes.
Or
Feel free.
So, yeah, if you were to do a historically accurate Western, but the sheer demographic would be totally skewed. It would be like at least 2/3 like some kind of like Hispanic, non-zero amounts of Native Americans.
Lots of Scandinavians.
Being a cowboy was kind of like a low-level job that was obviously shuffled off to the people of color. And depending on when you're doing it, the Civil War might have ended, and then racial politics in the United States just got thrown into a whack. And the very whitewashed version you've seen is a Hollywood John Wayne-esque influenced thing.
So really quickly, and then we're going to take questions. I want to do something called giving space to people of color who are not from America. It turns out that a lot of people would like to speak about how people from America, who are people of color, dominate the spaces. But then, unintentionally, it's almost as if their voices, their amazing, beautiful, white voices, somehow also end up drowning the people from their own country, and then they don't get to speak either. And it's unfortunate. So, would you like that?
Hi, Scandinavian person of color again. Represent. Maybe some of you saw my Nordic Larp talk, and for those of you who didn't, I will tell you quite quickly. It's about white knighting, which is basically someone coming in from a majority viewpoint and taking the space from a minority and telling them what they should be oppressed or feeling oppressed about and why they should not be okay with it, and just being really, really supportive kind of on top of them. And
I'm helping.
to a certain extent, sure, this is horrible. Please don't do that. But also, do speak up. Don't be afraid to speak up. Because, like I said, there are so few of us, and we'd like to be more. So if we know that the white people, all of you, are in our corner, you support us. You are there to tell people that, hey, stop being a racist. We want to include people. This is not okay. That is not okay. Shut up, you. Let this person talk. And I will also shut up and let this person talk. And just don't be afraid to white knight, actually. Just remember to let us speak as well, but help us. We need your help, please.
Yeah, so it is true that the Facebook group which we all belong to, the Larpers of Color, is dominated by Americans because there are so many more of them than there are of us European Larpers of Color. Why is that? Why is it that in Europe LARPing is a very white hobby? It's a very white pastime. And that is true, of course, of a lot of geeky pursuits. But my impression is that it's even more so in LARPing. Even in the UK, which has got an ethnic minority population approaching 12 or 13%, the number of active Larpers of Color who I see can probably be counted on the fingers of two hands quite comfortably out of, thousands and thousands of British Larpers. So how to make LARP more welcoming to Larpers of Color is a whole other big question, which I'm not going to go into now. But I want, those of you who are from European countries to sort of look at your own scenes, think of the people who you are seeing there, and, what sort of representation is happening there. Because Aina's from Norway, I'm from the UK, there's Lisel from Denmark, and you could probably, in your own mind, number off the number of people of colour who you're seeing at your LARPs.
Okay, now it gets dicey. I've always wanted to be Oprah, so we're gonna... If I could only have that Oprah money, though. Anyway, boo capitalism. Let's go. So, folks, this is what we're gonna do. Take a deep breath, breathe in, let it go. Questions? Don't get silent now. Y'all talk on the internet. Yes, my friend in the teal.
Hi, I noticed you used the M word, and I'm a mother of black children, and I have been taught and also feel very strongly about the M word being as derogative as the N word, and I noticed you both used it. So I know now you're not a monolith, but could I hear your opinion on the M word as well, please?
M word? Oh, see, we don't say that in America. That will get you hurt, friend. Someone called me a negress in Denmark while hitting on me. I would like to let you know that was weird. 'Cause he really thought that he was being sexy right then while handing me some mead, and I was like, I was with Lisel, so it was like double. I can't go to your country and hurt people. I'm so sorry. And they actually, here's the thing. They didn't know that that was not okay to call me. So we are in different spaces. I have been called a tragic mulatto before. That is a trope in which a black woman is caught between two worlds and dies because you can't be caught between two worlds. That is incredibly offensive. I'm not a mulatto. That means mule. I am not a mule, although they're very cute.
Radically different opinion here. I use that term to describe myself. I would not be offended if anyone used it to describe me. I will respect people who will not have that term used by anyone. But I personally always used it. My mother used it, but she has also used chocolate brown, and you don't get to use that. But she's my mum. But yeah, so personally, I don't find it offensive at all, and I never have, and I probably never will. But I absolutely respect people feeling offensive about it. So it's just, it depends. I read the room, I read the setting, and when I talk about myself, I feel okay saying it. But yeah. I think. Should I just take some? Please repeat the question.
Oh yes, of course. So that question was, how do we feel about? I've actually never heard it called the M word before. I thought you just said the N word twice, but mulatto, which for me is like, but for Aina is like, So, not a monolith. Also, really quickly, I have 2 black parents. So that would also be kind of inaccurate in the U.S. Because we are really ridiculous with race relations.
I have the questions here, so it's going to be that.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah, I
Ooh, that's a good.
How do I reach out to you guys, Monolith people, while do that as a white person?
Okay. The question was, how does one reach out to Larpers of Color? We're gonna need a better name so that we can kind of put us all together. How do you reach out to Larpers of Color so that we can write more diverse characters and diverse games? Anyone want to take that?
Yeah, so I suppose one thing is there's a bunch of us here. We're at KP. This is the kind of forum in which people meet and mingle and make connections. And although you may not know anyone personally yourself, the chances are that your friends will know people and the word can be spread. So I think, for me personally, I do get asked this question every now and then. And although I'd love to say yes to everyone, in practice it's not possible. And also, that's asking a lot of labour off me, which is a vexed topic in itself. So personal trust is important, and I'm much more likely to be able to help people who I have had some sort of personal contact with and who I know that they're doing it for the right reasons, and it's not just putting a check in a box because they want to improve their marketing strategy and so on. And, I'm not making any assumptions about any design. I know people want to design the best Larps they can, but, for me personally, I am going to want that eye contact and that conversation.
Yes.
Anyone else? Okay.
I wanna. Yeah. That would be you. Yes.
Yes, okay. So my question is that you said that I am very white and all my friends are also very white.
Have you thought about being my friend?
All my activities are white, and if I create a LARP and I say, hey, do you want to play on race relations, for example, and then some of my white friends say, I would like to play a black person. And, how can I deal with that? And not say, I'm not going to allow you to play the character that you want, but also say, maybe you shouldn't do blackface.
Well, always say maybe you shouldn't do blackface. Just in case you were wondering, the bare minimum to not be a horrible human being is to do blackface. Oh, but maybe we're giving you homage. No, you're not. You're not. Don't do that. Leave them everyone at home.
My first question, when people would, if they would ask you that question, I would straight away say, but why though? Is there a good reason for your character to be of a different ethnicity than yourself? And if it is that, oh yeah, because this LARP is a melting pot of cultures and people are coming from all over the world, and I would love to play someone coming from Africa, then sure, as long as that person, you trust that person to do the proper research and don't make it a portrayal of the black man, then I don't think that would be a problem. But there should be some relevance, not just like, I am going to College of Wizardry, I want to play Chinese. I'm like, don't.
Kat?
Yeah, so my opinion is similar, right? That there should be a reason that these characters are being introduced. But I think a really important reason is that if you have all white players, it can be very easy to erase the fact that there are people out there that aren't all white. And as someone who designs LARPs that often get played by mostly white players, it can get really frustrating because I want to write LARPs about people that aren't white, that I know and have experienced, right? So I think for me, there's also this aspect of telling stories so that we're not erasing them, but doing so in a sensitive way. There's lots of blogs, there's lots of web pages, there's lots of books that you can turn to if you don't have like a person right there to help you do that kind of research as well.
I also would like to point something out, which is there's nothing wrong with writing a story for white people. Trolls Ken Peterson wrote a lovely Fosterville scenario called Gargantua. That is written for white people to recognize things that happen around them. And you don't know that until you get into the middle of the game and go, oh. And that's valuable. That's super valuable. In addition, there's nothing wrong with exploring what happens in your culture. One of the games I love but I wouldn't go to, but I enjoy is 1942. That is Norwegian history. I think it's brilliant. Not a game I'd go to, but it's a game that should be done, and it's a game that should be made, and I think that those games are valuable. Do you want? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just specifically on the example of 1942, the designers explicitly said on the website that players of any ethnicity were welcomed, and your skin color would not be considered to be something that would bar you from playing a Norwegian fishing villager in the 1940s. And I think this is a tremendously generous offer, and I love the idea of the LARP. I cherished the experience the players were going to get, but I felt uncomfortable taking them up on that offer because, the quality of the immersive experience that they built was one into which my face would stand out. It would be a sore thumb. And although I know all the other players and everyone else involved would want me to feel included, it's just not physically possible to do so. So, I'm not saying don't make that offer. I'm really glad that it was made. But, I'm sure that I hope that they will understand why it is that we weren't able to take them up on it.
Okay, so
Next?
No, it's Ellen. Next question, I think.
Yes.
Yes, I mostly write contemporary LARP, and I try to write character skeletons without the gender.
Mm-hmm.
And I want
Yeah, you can just hold this because you're right there.
Yeah, and you talked about not making characters where a white ethnicity is implicit, and I wonder how you think and feel about the approach of giving just the first name of the person's letter. You will be a character called B something, A something, C something.
Yes. So how would I feel about just be given the first name of a character? The first letter. But the first name is not necessarily as, ethnic. Always, there's no indicator. I would rather prefer the last name to be anonymized than the first name. Because the first name can always be something really cool, like sun or rainbow or whatever. So did that answer your question? Yeah.
I just changed my name, or give myself a super black middle name.
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah.
I like it. I mean, whatever.
Okay. It's you. You had a question, right?
Yeah. I think I'm a bit confused in some parts because at some point you say you would like to have characters that are more playing or giving room for your ethnicity.
Mhm.
On the other hand, you are kind of not really liking other people, like like if there's a white person, whatever that means, you come up and you want to play someone with a different ethnicity. You're kind of skeptical about that idea. And what goes in my head while we have all these discussions, actually, what does it mean you have a white character? Because we are also not a monolith, right? So we have a lot of different cultures on all continents in the world, and there's different cultural backgrounds. Even, for instance, in my country, several ones. How is the difference between no, we should play on race, and I want to have a character that reflects my race, and I want to have a character that reflects my culture. Why is that such a big difference?
The difference between race and culture.
Yes, the difference between race and culture and how we would like to play that. Sounds about right? Who wants to go? Ross?
Well, I had another thought that was not actually related to race and culture, but well, okay. Well, I can say this because I actually see this whiplash all the time when people say, "How do I write race and culture?" And like all these different things. Should I do it or not? And the answers they get range from "Please do it" to like "No, never do it" to like everything in between. And often this answer changes because we encourage people, we see people write things and it looks good, and then you look deeper and you're like, "Ooh, no, okay, that was a bad idea. Let's not do that again." And I do feel kind of a lot of sympathy about this because on one hand, we all love these stories to be told. And we're not like, I don't think we don't have a monopoly on stories of people of color. Like, has anyone seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, the animated TV show? Good thing they never made a live movie. But like, that was written by two white guys that did the research. Like, my friend and I were sitting there as they're going through Earth Came, going, ooh, this is obviously Korea, and they did a really good job. Oh, now they're going through Ming China, before they did like ancient Han. And that was like brilliant. And then, but of course you could, in the same property, sometimes do it really wrong. And it's like,
Like in that movie that was not made.
yeah, the movie that they never ever made.
I would also like to point out that it is good to write. I mean, there is a difference between white and white and white. I mean, even in Norway, you have different types of Norwegians with different cultural backgrounds. So obviously, white isn't one monolith. Of course not. It's just that when you are from a very white country such as Norway and you write about Norwegian history, and you give all your character very, very Norwegian names, and it could just be that you don't want to be excluding, but it's hard to be including. But spice it up a little. Don't worry. Like, if you ask someone and just check in with someone, some people will always say no, but most people will say yes. If you try, if you want to be inclusive, people will accept that and see that.
Yeah. Well,
Just wanted to pick up on something that the questioner said. You know, I mean, you're quite right that what you've been hearing from us is confused and confusing, and some of our answers may seem contradictory. And that's, you know, we are sorry about that, but we're kind of feeling our way into this and exploring it at the same time as you are. We're not coming to you with a program and a project which we want you to sign up to. We're inviting you to join us on this journey. And but I think, you know, the simple answer of what is different between different types of white people and people of colour is, you know, the colour is written on our faces, and it's immediately apparent when we walk into a room, and we've all grown up with that reaction when you're walking down a street. People see you as the colour person who's walking down that street, whereas a white person of a different cultural background doesn't stand out in quite the same way. And obviously it's a question of degree, because there are different shades of colour, and there are some white ethnicities which are more noticeable than others. But I think, I mean, I hope that goes somewhere towards answering what you were questioning.
next.
So, someone in a purple scarf, do you feel like you had it? Yes.
My question is very specific. In mainstream Danish Larp community, we recently discovered this thing called blackface, and that led to a discussion about whether drows, black elves, is that blackface. And the one person of color who participated in that debate said that she just felt like it was a little weird that the only black thing we had was per definition extremely evil, and then like 200 white people told her she was wrong. So I just really wanted to hear different perspectives about that. I know it's really specific, but that's like.
Oh no, I've lived this life. Recently in the Danish Larp community, okay. Recently in the Danish Larp community, it has been brought to their attention that drows may be perpetuating the stereotype of blackness equaling evil, and that it could be seen as blackface. And it was really difficult for the singular Larper of Color who tried to bring this to people's attention when they were shouted down. Just so you know, this is not just a problem in Denmark. This is a problem that led me to crying on my bathroom floor while the rest of my thankfully white knighting friends were like, ah! And I really appreciate that. Thank you. But this does come from a historical background. Fantasy is rooted in tropes of the other. The other is this whole panel. uncivilized, uncultured, uncouth. You eat babies. You eat this. You are awful. You came to our country and you invaded us. All of these tropes are actually based on people of color. That's not like me making it up. That's real. There's lots of academia around it that you can read and Google for it. But blackness and skin color has really been codified. If you ever want to find something fun that will really illustrate this property, there is a YouTube video in which they record every single saying a person of color says in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. That will really illustrate the point, because the only people of color in the Lord of the Rings trilogy are the Maori, who were all hired to play orcs. Not elves, but just orcs. So just let that one sink in.
So I heard you talking about playing your ethnicity and how powerful that is, and it hit me that the one time that I've ever tried to play my ethnicity, which is Latina, because I'm very pale-skinned, when I brought my character with my name, everyone was basically anglicized the name of the character I had brought, and basically turned this character I'd written to play my own ethnicity. It's the only time I've ever tried to play my ethnicity as Latina, as people morphed it into an anglicized name just by automatically. And I guess I was wondering how you deal with like trying to play your ethnicity when you're perceived as not fitting what your ethnicity is supposed to be.
How do you play?
Okay, so the question is, I got the mic. The question is, how do you play your ethnicity when you don't fit what other people think that your ethnicity should look like? And in this particular example, take what should be a Latinx name and anglicize it, thus erasing the identity, which I know those feels. Yeah, I'm sure you can imagine. I think it's a real challenge, and I think one thing it's very important to think about as we're talking about people of color is that people often have an idea of what people of color look like. That you can pick them out in a crowd, and definitely for some people of color that is true. And Mo's example of walking down the street and having that be a visible like marker of who you are and how people treat you is a fundamental experience of many people of color. But then there are those of us who walk into a room and we have to announce the fact that, hey, I'm not just white. I am also a person of color. And having the experience of other white people, other people of color questioning our identity. And so I think it's partly like, how much energy do you have, right? Do I have the energy to be like, no, it's Belinda Ziegler, not Belinda Ziegler, because this character has a Mexican mother and a German father, right? Because it's something that I have to do a lot in my everyday life. Do I have the energy in the LARP to do it as well? But I think, again, this is where I'm a big fan of transparency. So if people know that this is in the character's background, perhaps that will make it easier for them to recognize that this is an important part of this character's identity, or, finding ways to weave it in. So I played Belinda Ziegler at New World Magischola. She was a professor who I made Mexican, German, American. And I told people stories about my abuela and about this and that, and sort of wove it in to sort of bring up the fact that this was an important part of this character's heritage, right? But I think it's work, right? It takes work. So as a designer, things that you can do to help make those aspects of a character's identity visible to other people, so that it isn't always incumbent on the player to do that work.
Great. Okay, Martina.
This is really scary.
Why?
Because I feel this. You're talking about wanting to be able to play
Mhm.
not white at large, right? And I think, yeah, I want to write more diverse larps with
Well,
and what that would feel like. Both from the outside and from like the inside, right? It can get really bad really fast, right? How like what would your tips be to open up a bit and not end up with the horrible racial stereotypes?
So how to avoid stereotypes?
Yeah, so how to avoid, if you want to write a LARP that includes characters that are not like just explicitly white, how do you include that potentially for players who are white while not diving into the horrific realm of stereotypes? So I wrote a Golden Cobra game called The Long Drive Back to Busan, which is, some of my players are here, about a K-pop boy group that in their entire career is like going horribly awry, and it's about them going to a festival and experiencing the tragedies there. And all of the characters are explicitly Korean men. I was very, very nervous to write this because I knew that pretty much all of my players were going to not be Korean. I've never had a single other Korean person in this game. And so I knew that from personal experience, there are some things that could come up that I would find more offensive than others. And for other Korean people, it could be that they wouldn't experience the same thing, but I had to write something that I would be comfortable running. So I had a whole section that was explicitly just about how to play Korean if you're not Korean. So it was things like, don't just drop random vocabulary that you know, because there are some people who, like, the Korean entertainment industry is like booming right now, and so there's a whole fandom around it, and people will try to like use a lot of the vocabulary, and sometimes that's okay, and sometimes it really brings me back to a time in my childhood when if someone was trying to speak Korean to me and they weren't Korean, they were trying to like be racist to me, or if someone was bowing to me, they were doing it to make fun of my ethnicity, not to like honor it anyway. So I also said, let's not have any bowing in here as a side of greeting or anything like that. And I was really nervous about that section being in there because I knew people were going to be like, well, why are you telling me to play Korean but not do these things? And I think it is a fine balance trying to find the place where ethnicity is important, but it's not all about that. And so I put a line in that was just focus more on you're playing this group of, this boy band that's trying to like have the successful career, but they're clashing with each other, and that's more the focus than the fact that like you don't need to prove that they're Korean at every step of the way. And it's going to depend, like every LARP's going to be very different. This was a very, very niche specific thing. But I think it is a lot about trying to find people of color who are going to be able to speak to that experience and double checking with them don't go to them with a completely blank page, but go to them with some possibilities perhaps, and accept that sometimes the answers you're going to get for what you've written already are not going to be really super pleasant to hear. And I've been in that place as well.
Mo, really quickly.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Your players hopefully want to treat these characters with respect in the same way that you do, and so that's the most important thing. And if you don't have to provide them with a Bible of authenticity. You just have to make them think, okay, if you are that character, what's their life like, and how's that going to inform your play? And it's better if they don't get too hung up on the and they don't get scared off the experience. I think a generally respectful and welcoming and open mind is the most important thing that they can bring to it, and the most important thing that you can bring to your design.
Yes, and lay off the accents.
Next question.
Yep, that is John.
So, as a player and a writer in the UK scene, I recognise what Mo said. There is a vast underrepresentation of Larpers of Color in the UK. When I thought about how that might be addressed, something I've struggled to find is any way to communicate with Larpers of Color. There's Larpers of Color Unite on Facebook, which I don't want to go to because it is a space for you. So how do we start the dialogue between those of us that are in a position of privilege, the white, middle-class, middle-aged male, and the Larpers of Color that we would like to include into our spaces? Where do we communicate?
Welcome to our panel.
Yeah.
So
Aside from here.
where do you communicate?
Yeah, so the question was, how do mainstream ethnicity LARPers communicate with Larpers of Color? Where is the space in which that reaching out and that contact can take place? And I mean, the same answer as before. Here is that space, but I mean, the sad truth is there aren't very many of them, and by being in this room, you are doing about as much outreach as is physically possible at this time, because the real outreach that needs to be done is to people of colour who are not LARPers and who don't feel that LARP is for them. And we don't have anything like enough time to even start talking about that. But that's something that really needs to be examined. What is it about LARP that is making people of colour steer away from it?
And also, Larpers of Color is open for people who aren't Larpers of Color.
Yes.
Please come. Just wait to speak. It's just come and lurk.
And also, like, accepting that the racial demographics in the UK might be different from that of the, in fact, are actually vastly different from that of the United States. In terms of practical tips, the Living Games 2016, and I'm going to speak carefully because some of the organizers are here, so I might be putting words in their mouth. But one thing they explicitly did was actually reach out to people of color. Like, so you can send the general announcements, but if you actually personally reach out to people in the community and ask them to come and say, you're welcome, in fact, we want you here. I might be making, I think something I heard was that a lot of them said words to the effect that, oh, this conference is in Texas, I don't feel welcome here, until someone personally reached out to me, and then that actually was a motivating decision in me coming. And that was...
Okay, we're going to speed question, because y'all have stuff to say. Next.
Jamie.
Jamie.
One quick thing is I'm one of the organizers of Just a Little Love It in Finland this summer, and you might imagine that is a very, very, very white run of Just a Little Love It. So if
I'm going to be there.
we are keeping, of course, the Latinx characters. They will be played by white people, but if you have like anybody with questions want to ask us how we're handling it, how we're trying to work with it, I'd love to talk and also help work with it, because it's coming up soon. So we want to work with those players on an individual basis, how they can better portray and not erase, but not appropriate. But my question for you cats is that I'm just wondering if you feel when you are kind of representing a monolith of people as yourself in a community where you sometimes get into arguments and you have to be on your best behavior all the time, and you have to present the best possible image of who you are. Do you feel that stress, and what kind of stories would you like to tell if you didn't have to be so perfect all the time?
Come see me after this.
Oh, yeah. One of these days, we're going to burn a plantation in a LARP that I want to do. I want to literally burn a plantation. Those are the types of stories I would like to tell when I'm not on my best behavior.
Any more?
Yes.
I have just, what about franchised games? Franchised licenses. I have just been asked to help organize a Star Wars lab.
Oh.
And in France, how to I don't have the word.
Say it in French.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Seriously, say it in French.
Aborder le sujet de l'inclusivité et des...
Yes, so how to... Oh, that's actually a different word.
Introduce.
Yeah, to introduce the subject.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I don't have an answer to that question. Yeah, so how to aborder le sujet, how to interview or like include the subject in question.
Star Wars is a little different because in Star Wars, people of color just exist. Like, I'm just existing here. There's no reason why I can't be anything I want in a Star Wars game because you are in a universe in which we all just appear, and like sometimes we're aliens and sometimes we're not. Thank you, Billy D. Williams. But there's that is a little different, but there are other franchises where things, I guess, get dicey. Hashtag Firefly. So, anyone want to take that? Anyone have a good answer? Probably not a good short answer, so talk to us. We're happy to help. Next. Siri. Oh, we love you too.
When I was writing educational LARPs, I realized that a lot of the classes I went to had a lot of mixed ethnicities in them. And so I started to bring in names that I would think of as Middle Eastern or other ethnicities into the characters. And I'm starting to think, maybe that's not a good thing, or is it a good thing? And of course, you will all have different opinions on it, but it ties into the whole having white people play people of color and appropriation. And if I would do that in a LARP for our community and just have some randomly scattered ethnicities mixed into the bunch, how do I do that without it becoming like I'm typecasting you as the African, Aina?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how to include ethnicity among white people and how to not typecast. I say yay for making not standard Swedish or Norwegian names into your LARP characters, and I say yay to casting random people as random ethnicities. I think that we should all be able to play. If I can play white, why can't you play a mixed race person? And again, it's just, you know me, I am not very stereotypically black or anything. And I don't think there are any very stereotypically black people in the world, to be honest. So just, stay away from stereotypically things. I think I worded up my words.
But also, my name is Jonaya, which in the U.S. reads super black, because any name that is not an Anglo-Saxon name is therefore just pushed into an other pile. But sometimes I really felt nice to be playing a Keisha. Keishas need love too, y'all. Next question.
Yes, Tira?
Perfect. Next.
Over in the back here.
All the way in the back.
2 weeks ago at the Swedish LARP convention, Prolog, there was a discussion about normal being white. And Anna Erlandsson, she gave a tip that you should really look to yourself and the group that you are making the LARP with and thinking, what do we want to accomplish when it comes to diversity, but also why do we want this? Why is this a question for us? Just as you said, so it's not just a checkbox for us to help with marketing, but it's actually something that we are passionate for. But I wonder if you have a tip. What's the first step? If we are a group and we're going to make a LARP, okay, we want to be equal and have a diversity. And now we're going to think about how we're going to be diverse. What's the first question to ask yourself? Or what is the first step on working?
So, what's the first step into thinking about creating more diverse games? I'm gonna say something super controversial. Having friends from diverse backgrounds really help, and that's true. And not just diverse backgrounds. I mean, like, there are people who are Jewish, and there are people who are Muslim, and there are people who are pagan, and there are people who are indigenous, and there are people. All of these people share multiple marginalized identities. People who are queer, that's like, you put them in the room. Put them in the room. And then you figure out what your game is about. Your game could be about two flowers chilling and like having a good time, and maybe some dinosaurs come. I don't know. That is a game now. The point is this. The point is that these people who are sitting at the table are going to bring their own life stories to your table. And that is what's going to yield diversity, right? Like, that is my opinion.
Exchange earring for. Oh,
No, you want to
after you do it.
No, Ross.
Oh, Ross, after you.
Yeah, I was just to say quickly, first of all, that you're doing that is the first right step, because actually incorporating it in design from the beginning instead of tacking it on as an afterthought really, really helps. The other really, really quick thing I have to say is usually whenever there is diversity problems, it's usually like 90% subconscious. So just sitting down and like navel gazing, say like what unconscious assumptions am I making? Like, for example, that everyone is by default white. Should I actually then try to like attack and like just strip from my design?
Rob?
So this is something that Jonaya, you mentioned in your talk the other day, and something that I've seen a lot, and something that I'm sure everybody here has seen a lot, and that's white players wanting to play racist characters. I expected that cringe. I feel it every single time myself. And the question, so a lot of games in the United States have flat banned that sort of play completely, which I agree with. But my question is it possible to play such a thing respectfully, and if so, how?
Is it possible for a person to play a racist character? The answer is yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to raise the Norwegian Larp Saint Croix, which some of you may have played, and it was set in a slave colony, and some of the players were playing slaves and some were playing slave owners. And it was important, for the powerful play to be generated within that framework, the white characters had to be racist, otherwise it didn't make sense. It was a game about oppression, and for oppression to exist, you've got to have some people who are playing the oppressors. And that, is a painful task to take on, and people who play those roles need help just as much as those who are suffering oppression. So I think, it certainly is possible to play racism within the LARP, but it's got to be, for the right reasons and with respect and with the right support and guidance around that.
Kat?
So earlier we brought up the question of why would you want to play a character from another ethnicity? And when somebody wants to play a racist character, my first question is always, why? Is it because you're actually a racist and you want to get an alibi to say all those nasty things that you can't say in polite company? Or is it because you want to have this very powerful experience, right? And I think, again, thinking about why you want to play that character, what you're adding to the experience, is it one of the focuses of the game, right? Or are you just like, we're in olden times and people were racist then, so we're going to bring the N-word into this Fortune and Felicity game, right? Exactly. Why, right? Done in concert with other players and other characters having that discussion about what it is adding to the game, I think it can be done well and really add a lot. But if it's just this sort of like, 'cause it's olden times or 'cause I want to say the stuff that I can't usually say, that's, I think, when we run into the problem.
Super quick. Super quick. At JAL, I had a really powerful experience with a player who cut a scene. She was being very racist towards me, and she cut the scene because she could not handle being a racist. And I held her hand until she felt okay, and then she goes, "Okay, let's go again." And we did it again. And guess what? It was great. But exploring those tough topics, you don't have to shy away from them, but let's question ourselves.
One of the things that we've talked about in a few different contexts is that there are a bunch of different audiences for any given instance of a game. Some of them are the people playing there, some of them are the people screaming about it on Facebook later, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have any thoughts about, especially for exploring more complex topics like race, are there times when it makes sense to run a game where you make sure that it doesn't leave the room thoughts on kind of managing the different audiences to let you explore topics? And the second question that I'm just going to throw out at the same time, I am interested in experiences of the transition when you leave a game where you have been playing a character with a body very different than yours, and that reintegration moment.
Ooh, those are very interesting. Oh, yeah. Hold on. I don't know if I can because I started thinking about them. Can someone who has full brain function?
Okay, so there's two slightly linked questions. One is that a LARP has many audiences, potentially, as well as the people who are taking part in it. There's like the world outside when they come to hear about it. And is there a case in which it makes sense for the LARP experience to not leave the room? And then the second question was, about the whole process of coming out of a LARP where you've been representing a body that's different from your own. How can that be managed? And, I really don't think we've got enough time, sadly. I mean, I think certainly I've often wished that the LARP might not leave the room because I don't have the mental or physical energy to grapple with the task of managing it to the outside world. And I think that's something that as an organizer you've got to be prepared for. And if you're not prepared for it, be realistic. If you don't want to have to defend your LARP against a horde of internet trolls, then keep it quiet. I suppose, I'm sorry, it's a kind of defeatist answer, but we are human beings and we've only got so much that we can do.
If you don't want to do it, don't.
Just quickly, I think that I have two opinions. First opinion is do it anyway, because sometimes difficult topics need to be seen. There's many theater works. Theater is always putting this stuff in your face, and why we think LARP is different is beyond me. We have always done really hard theater work, and I don't see why we can't do hard LARP work. Sorry. If I make a game that looks bad, I should be able to explain to you why the game is like this way. And I don't have a problem with it. I do understand we're still growing. So what we are doing here is not yet reached full mainstream with everyone thinking about it. But if you have the ability to do the work, do the work. That is my one opinion. Second, I think there is space in LARP to do secret LARP games that not everybody can come to. That sounds elitist, but sometimes if you have a LARP where you're like, okay, we're going to do a LARP about a black family, and we're just going to talk about some things, and we're going to be in this one space, and it's going to be really hard, and it's going to be really sad, and we need to talk about it within each other. I think that's okay. I think it's okay to do those small spaces. I think it's okay to create LARPs that way because you're exploring yourself, because that's what LARP is, yield identity alteration. So I think we should talk about that. Did you? Last questions. Last one question. Yes.
This is far too big to ask now.
Really though? Okay, go.
Do you think the fact that the mode of engaging with LARP is embodying as an art form, do you think that changes things versus other art forms where the mode is watching something? As in, to put a character in a LARP, someone has to pretend to be that character, whereas a white audience can watch the film and do it. How does that
You killing me.
The short answer has to be yes.
Okay, this was a question about LARP and the fact that LARP is about embodiment. And when you're asking someone to LARP rather than theater where you get to watch somebody embodying a character, when you're asking someone to LARP, you're asking them to embody that character. My friend Julia Ellingbo, a wonderful designer of color, likes to say, why is it that people feel completely comfortable LARPing as elves and wizards and embodying those characters, but then you ask them to embody a black person and all of a sudden it gets dicey. And it does get dicey, right? We've been talking all about how things can go horribly wrong. People can put on these really terrible accents, rely on stereotypes. But part of it for me is about finding the core humanity of the character, right? You got to figure out how to be an elf. You got to figure out how to be a wizard. So you have to find something in that character. And the second thing is this 360 thing. Maybe it's because I come out of tabletop and you just make up whatever. But this idea that you look like your character and there can be no imagination placed on top of that, that to me is actually more of a problem than the embodiment aspect.
Final thoughts down the row.
Go. Said my piece. I dropped my mic.
Really, just in general, thanks for coming. I don't know.
Africa is not a country.
The table and room that we're talking about, like invite people of color there, that room is the internet. And there's a difference between demanding help and asking politely for it.
Just wanted to say that I'm really thrilled and happy that there are so many people here with us and that we've been able to share this experience with each other. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us space, giving us way over time, and thank you for standing up for us when we're really, really tired. Because the work is difficult on us, but we also know that the work takes a toll on you. Thank you for fighting with us, and yes, let's go make some cool LARPs, y'all. Thank you.